Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's workshop, Reader's Advisory, Ideas and Practice, presented by Booklist. My name is still Susan Maguire, and I'm still the Senior Editor for Collection Management and Library Outreach here at Booklist, and I'm joined for this final workshop by Booklist Audio Editor and my colleague, Heather Booth. We'd like to take a minute to thank our sponsors, Penguin Random House Library Marketing and Sourcebooks, for their generous support of this program. Some of their resources were showcased throughout today's program, but we will also send out some additional resources and recommendations from our sponsors in tomorrow's follow-up materials. Before we begin our final program, I'd like to go over some technical details one last time. Links to all of today's slide presentations were included in the reminder email you received from Zoom 1 hour ago. To download them, please open that email, scroll to the bottom, and click on the links located there. We will send PDFs of all these slides, along with additional materials from our sponsors, to everyone tomorrow. If you have trouble locating these materials, please contact us at webinars@booklistonline.com. The audience is in listen-only mode, but we encourage everyone to submit your technical questions in the Q&A box. Put questions for the panelists in the chat, and we'll be sure to respond to unanswered questions after the webinar via email. Booklist offers closed captioning on all webinars. To enable or disable captions on your screen, please look for and click the captions icon on the toolbar mentioned earlier. From there, you can select show or hide captions from the menu that appears. If you choose to enable subtitles, you can adjust the size of the captions at any time by selecting subtitle headings. And finally, Booklist expects all participants to maintain an atmosphere of respect and fairness. Anyone who violates this standard of behavior, including engaging in any form of harassment, may, at the discretion of the organizers, be immediately removed. So let's get started with our final workshop, Crafty and Concise Book Blurbs, and we'll begin by introducing ourselves. And there's my face, everyone. Let me get our slide presentation going. Okay, so I'm Susan Maguire, Senior Editor, Collection Management and Library Outreach at Booklist, as you know, and I've worked for a decade in public libraries before joining Booklist, with experience in reference, reader services, collection management, and circulation. I love reading and talking to librarians about talking about reading. I'm a sucker for a love story in any book in which the dog does not die at the end. And Heather Booth, audio editor, has been at Booklist since 2018, a librarian since 2002, and has been listening to audiobooks since they came on records that were tucked into paper pockets in her picture books. Who remembers that? She enjoys YA fiction, leads a couple of Girl Scout troops, and drinks a lot of coffee, and is trying to learn to hula hoop. So there you go. Today we're going to talk to you about writing crafty and concise book blurbs. So while we start talking, while I give you some background on the next slide, jot down the titles of a few books you've read recently that you at least sort of remember, because we'll use those in some exercises that we do during the presentation. First, a little background on Booklist. Booklist is the book review magazine of the American Library Association, and we review thousands of books and audiobooks a year, all geared toward helping library workers decide what will go in their collections and help them connect their patrons to their next great read. Our new publication, Booklist Reader, is our library patron-facing magazine featuring diverse readers' advisory recommendations in print and on audio for readers of all ages. Booklist Reader doesn't contain reviews, but it does contain themed annotated lists. Both Booklist and Booklist Reader are full of blurbs that you can adapt for your own purposes if you don't want to write them from scratch. But today, we're going to teach you to write those blurbs from scratch. So get ready.
All right, I'm going to start us off by talking about what is a book blurb, what's useful, what's not useful in a book blurb. A lot of times when we talk about book blurbs, or when patrons come in saying things like, oh, I saw a blurb about this book or whatever, they're talking about these little snippets that come on book covers. So here are a few that I've pulled that have different usefulness. So let's talk about what's useful, what's not useful in these. It's important to remember that anything comes with its context. So that quote at the top, "This book will win your heart," doesn't have a whole lot of meaning in and of itself, but the fact that it's written by Ellen Hildebrand and is probably on the cover of a book that's going to be very aesthetically pleasing and it gives you a very specific Ellen Hilderbrand approved vibe, that's going to be what's useful to a person. Something like Spencer gives you all the feels. Again, it doesn't have a lot of real specific content about what the book's going to be about. It does give you a little bit of info about what the reading experience is going to be like. It's going to be a highly emotional book, but what emotion, just like we learned in the last session, it could be highly variable. So we need a little bit more in order to contextualize that and make that useful. I really do like this people quote, warm and charming. Those are two really useful words that are not really up for debate. You know, we know what a warm feeling is when we read a book. We can understand what charming is, as opposed to just saying you're going to love it. Barry is the master scientist with a perfect formula. So, I mean, obviously, you don't know which Barry just by this quote. It's Steve Barry. This is going to be fast-paced, globe-trotting thriller, and that's going to be what's useful. Associating him as an author with these qualities. And then finally, another one where the author is really important. Marian Keyes saying about this novel, an excellent and important novel. So taking a Marian Keyes statement saying it's an excellent and important novel is going to be a lot different than, say, Toni Morrison saying it's an excellent and important novel. That's going to be useful context for the reader. Why are good blurbs important? So all of what we're talking about today is reader's advisory. So they're primarily important in helping people find the right book for them. So that's the main purpose of why we're writing these blurbs. We can't be everywhere at all times. So having places in our library where readers can find blurbs, find our writing about books is a great way to extend our services so that patrons can help themselves when they don't have the time to stop and have a long chat with us at the reference desk, or if they don't feel like they're in the mood to talk with us. It's also a great way for us to educate our colleagues and continue to create a culture of books in our library and a culture of reading among our staff. Sharing what we're reading, sharing what we think of what we're reading and how it can be useful to our patrons is a great way to expand reader's advisory from, say, one person's job or part of one person's job into a task that everybody in the library community can engage with. Finally, it's a great way to personalize your service. If you're doing blurbs specifically for a person, you can tailor that to what they have said that they were interested in that reader's advisory interview. You can also develop your own personal voice so that when I look at that shelf of staff reads, I know that those Susan recommendations are going to be X, Y, and Z, as opposed to the Heather recommendations that are going to be something else. And even if you're not in a position where you're able to share your writing about book blurbs with other patrons, maybe this is a skill you're still just working on, it's going to help remind you of what you've read in the past for that time when it is time to pull the recommendations out and share them with a patron or a colleague.
Because how many times have somebody said, can you recommend a book? And you're like, what's a book? So a good blurb is short, but it's mighty. When you're crafting a blurb, you want to think about the appeal of the book. So you're including what you can about the setting, the characterization, the pace, the tone, and the writing style. You want to include a little bit about the plot, but you're going to focus on those other appeal elements because they can get the plot from the back of the book. They don't need you to go through the whole thing for them. Another good technique for crafting a good blurb is something that our friend Becky Spratford likes to do. When she finishes a book, she writes down 3 appeal-driven words that describe the book to her. She's used words like intricate plotting, great characters, and immersive, or engaging narration, facing real fears, and strong world building. This not only helps you remember what you've read, but it also helps you condense what was so good about the book, which is useful when you're writing your blurb. Give yourself a little time when you finish the book to let it marinate. I can't write a review right after I finish the book. I have to give it a day if I can, or at least a few hours to let the book settle in my mind before I'm able to think clearly enough about the book to write about it. And then finally, you're going to want to be mindful of the voice you use when you're writing your blurb. I think casual and conversational is a good place to start, and it's the most common voice you'll use, but know your audience. You're not writing formal essays, but what you write for your formal newsletter announcement of the new book group title is a little different from what you'll use to write a shelf talker on the staff pick shelf. and both are different from what you'd use on something in the children's department. Your voice matters, so make sure you consider it.
So speaking of voice, you're going to use different voice depending on how you're using your blurbs. So how are we going to use these blurbs? I talked a little bit about this just a minute ago, but here are some yet more examples of how you're going to use these blurbs. Social media. You're hard pressed to find a library that's not doing their best out there on social media these days, and blurbs are a great way to link your great product, all of those books, with your social media presence. It's something that we do well. It's something we can write about well, and it's something that our patrons, our viewership, are interested in. Those blind date with a book displays are an excellent way to showcase your book blurbs because all people are getting in that instance is what you're writing. They're not seeing the author. They're not seeing all of that great cover art. It's going to give them hints about the tone and the genre of a book. They're just relying on your words. So if you really want to hone your book blurb writing skills, set yourself up for a blind date with a book display and really get to it because that's where every single word is going to be super important. Staff picks are another thing that people really rely on the description that you're using. Like everybody in the library has, one of the things I love about working in libraries is that everybody's interests are just so out there. You can find any staff member who's there that's going to have a very different interest or reading style than any given patron who walks in. And so it's important to understand that those staff, just by virtue of it being a staff pick, does not mean it's a book for everybody. So let's work on the words that we use when we recommend a book so that people really know who is the staff person that they're going to follow. Formal annotations, like what you might use in a book discussion, write up in the newsletter, or maybe if you're promoting a one book, one community, that's going to be a very different voice, a very different tone from what you're going to use in a quick and dirty while you're waiting list.
Remember, oops, I'm trying to go forward, sorry. Remember, a blurb is short. Here's some tips for keeping things short. Instead of recounting the whole book plot, which remember, you neither have the time nor the necessity for, just say after a series of events. Institute a word count for yourself. A book list review is 175 words, which is kind of long for a blurb, and the blurbs that we use in annotated book lists are anywhere from 25 to 50 words. A word count will help you keep it short. Try identifying a purpose for each sentence. One is for the plot, one's for evaluation, and one's for appeal. So you might end up with something like, after a series of events, Janet the baker finds herself investigating the murder of her arch nemesis. The characters are believable even while the plot goes off the rails. It's funny and fast-paced, and the dog is really cute. That's always mention the dog if there's a dog in your book. Just kidding. Think about what you'd say to a patron who's running for the train and you're trying to suggest a book to them before they board. You only have 2 sentences at most to sell your book. What are you going to say to them? And when you're drafting your blurb, take a look and see if you can remove any sentences or phrases. Do you describe too much plot? Are you putting in too many specifics about the characters? Keep going, keep editing until you can't anymore.
Something else that's going to help you hone your writing into making it as useful as possible is trying to do your best to avoid cliches. So words like edge of your seat, perfect beach read. So edge of your seat could be a really scary horror novel. It could be, are they going to finally end up in the end? It could be fast-paced adventure. It's not as useful as it could be. Perfect beach read, well, I mean, that's kind of like subjective to everybody, as evidenced by the To Beach Their Own feature that Booklist is doing. Everybody's perfect beach read is going to be something different. It doesn't have to have a beach on the cover. Something I see all the time when I'm editing audiobook reviews, when I hear people talk about audios, is they'll say the narrator breathes life into the character, which, like, that's literally what they're doing when they're actually speaking the words. And so it's not as useful as it could be. If we could get deeper into what's actually happening to make it feel so lifelike. And it'll appeal to all readers. I think we would like to think this is true of our favorite books. It almost is never true. So let's get more specific about what kind of reader we're really talking about when we want to say it'll appeal to all readers. What do we actually mean? Sometimes, though, a cliche can be a useful thing. So if we say things like, if we convert edge of your seat to tense and suspenseful, perfect beach read could be something like upbeat and ideal for leisurely days, as you can see in these examples. Using a cliche is a great way if you want to connect it to a particular tone, a particular hearken to some point of reference that the reader is going to have. Like, of course, I didn't write it down in my notes. I'm not thinking of an example right now, but if you can think of a cliche that's going to indicate some cultural touchstone, that's when you want to use the cliche. Otherwise, push further.
So let's look at an example. Here's a starred review of romantic comedy by Curtis Sittenfeld, written by the great Annie Bostrom. It's 202 words, but it still focuses on plot, evaluation, and appeal. So this is probably longer than your average annotation, but I'm going to read it real quick. I'm going to put on my fast reading voice. It's the same as my regular reading voice. So, when yet another schmopey guy, this time her office mate at the Saturday Night Live style show where she works, starts dating an uber hot and talented female celebrity, comedy writer Sally channels her rage/certainty that a gorgeous male celebrity would never fall in love with an ordinary, dorky, unkept woman into a sketch. The host and musical guest for this week's episode of The Night Owls is the outrageously handsome superstar Noah Brewster, who seeks Sally's help punching up his own sketch. She's known around the studio as the queen of comedic structure. Sure that there could be nothing between them due to the aforementioned law-turned-sketch, intimacy-phobic and perhaps ordinary, dorky, and unkempt Sally is at her best brilliant, warm self with Noah during the week-long lead-up to the show, a fun and frenetic frame for the book's first half that's full of insider feeling, behind-the-scenes excitement. You can see where this might be going, and yet how much you'll enjoy getting there. Dialogue zips and zings as hearts plummet and soar through Sally and Noah's meeting, misunderstanding, and years later rapprochement as COVID-19 dawns. Sittenfeld's meta-romance is an utterly perfect version of itself, a self-aware and pandemic-informed love story that's no less romantic for being either. So you see, you get a really good sense of what happens in the book, but you also get a sense of who the characters are. You get a sense of what the reading experience is going to be like, the writing tone, the writing style rather, and that you get that all from 200 words, but it could be shorter. Here's an annotation that I used in our top 10 relationship fiction list. You'll notice that I stole some of the language from Annie's review. A sharp, intimacy-phobic writer for a Saturday Night Live style show who turns her rage at uber-hot female celebrities dating their schmopey coworkers into a sketch finds herself connecting with an uber-hot musical guest in this meta-romance full of zippy dialogue. So again, it's all one sentence, but you have part of the sentence about plot, and then part of it about the zippy dialogue, about the writing style and tone, and you still get a sense of the book without all the detail. But you can make it even shorter. Here is the annotation Annie wrote for our starred review issue. This meta-romance starring a cynical comedy writer and the superstar singer-songwriter who falls for her is a self-aware and pandemic-informed love story that's no less romantic for being either. So that, again, even less detail, but you still get a sense of the book. And let's make it ridiculously short. Bookofthemonth.com says, 2 minutes to showtime, romance, check, comedy, check, midlife crises, workplace antics, big feels, and feminism, check. So this won't work for every situation. It probably won't sell the book to your book club because they might want some more information about it, but it would work for, say, a blind date with a book. It's really snappy and attractive, and it will pique readers' curiosity, so it'll get them to pick up the story.
So somebody in the comments had said that 200 word review was too long, and I think it's important to keep in mind that each type of writing that we're doing has a specific purpose. And so that 200-word review was written so that a librarian could decide whether or not to purchase it for the collection. It's trying to give them as much information as they can for that. And so then as we continue to revise it, the audience is changing, and so the way we write about the book is changing too. I just wanted to make that clear. So at this point, we're going to go back to those books that you were all thinking about. at the beginning, pull that back out of your brain and start thinking about that book in terms of these different appeal elements. Think about the tone, jot down some words that you can associate with the tone, characters, pace, language, setting, etc. We're going to give you a few minutes to do that. And I'll keep an eye on the chat if you have questions about the types of words you might use as you're writing.
I can't see the chat, Heather, so
Oh, okay.
You're my chat representative.
Got it.
It's been about a minute. Do you want to give them another minute? Do you need another minute?
Everybody have a few words written down. Susan and I were talking about this as we were planning it, that like leaving empty space in a virtual presentation seems interminable.
A nightmare.
All right, we're going to move on. You're welcome to continue writing adjectives and appeal elements as we continue. So this is a formula that now that you have some words, we're going to try to plug it in kind of Mad Lib style. This is not what we expect you guys to be using when you're writing your blurbs all the time. But if you find that you have a hard time writing a book blurb, especially writing a book blurb without including a lot of plot, which I think is the natural instinct for a lot of us when we first start talking about books, let's try to think about this kind of formula. So it's a blank book about a blank who blanks. So you can include so many different things just in this first sentence. It's a mystery book about a baker who stumbles upon somebody stuck in the dough, I don't know, or a baker who has agoraphobia, or a baker who dreams of living in the Arctic. If you like books that, and then here you can include so many different elements that are going to relate this type of book to another type of book. If you like books that have been made into movies, if you like books that keep you wanting to turn the page to find out what happens next, if you like books that feel like a warm hug, all of these things can go in that place. People who have liked this have also liked this book. So it could be another book, it could be a video game experience, like, you know, it could be an author. Kind of let your mind go, you know, your creativity go wild at this point. Think about what's going to make it useful for that reader saying, oh, that's what I want, so I'm going to pick up this book. So here's an example of how that might work. I'm going to use this to talk about a children's book. I know that that's not the topic of our presentation here in general, but I feel like it's really clear when you use a children's book as in an example like this, how the tone and the terminology changes based on the audience. So here's an example of something that I might say to an adult who is looking for a book to read. I'm going to say it's a quiet book, this gorgeous little witch hazel book. It's a quiet book. I'm going to talk about her helpful forest friends. If you like books that show the changing seasons, a focus on kindness and friendship, which might be something of interest to a teacher, for example, who's looking for a read along to go along with a particular unit. Something that has a vintage style with a modern spin. Those are terms that an adult is going to understand, where a child might not necessarily get that, but it's going to show a specific appeal here. And then, of course, referencing books that people might know. Oh, what's a quiet book? So a quiet book would be something that's more pensive, something that you might just like sit and read with a child, or feel like you can just like, you just want to kind of cozy up with it and read, as opposed to something that's like getting your heart going. So that's what I might say if an adult is coming in and wants a book recommendation. If we can go on, I can show you how I might adjust that if it's a younger reader who is coming to the desk and I'm asking and they're looking for a book to read. Here, I'm going to say it's a pretty book. It's gorgeous. It's got all these beautiful illustrations about this character. If you like books with lots to look at. So that's something that a kid is going to understand. They like the Richard Scarry Busy Town books. They like the I Spy books. They like a graphic novel where there's lots of different things that their eyes can follow around the page. If you like happy endings, that's so important for so many readers, not just kids. It's okay to say that. It's okay. You're not spoiling anything, just like we talked about the rules of a romance. It's got to have a happy ending. It's okay totally to throw that in, I think for younger readers in particular, but for anybody. If you like finding things in nature, this is a book that you might like. So that's an example of using an activity or an experience that the right reader is going to really latch on to. You know, those kids that come home with their pockets full of rocks and pretty stones and, you know, dandelion petals and stuff like that, dandelion fuzz. Those are the kids that are going to like this book. So that's an example. You might try plugging your book and with your adjectives into a formula like this. So we're going to make yours into a blurb. So choose your blurb style. It could be, I see some people are kind of putting that in, putting some of their blurbs into the comments already. That's fantastic. Yeah, cozy children's book is another great way to describe that. So, all right, so you can talk about, Susan, this one's you, sorry.
Oh. Yes. Okay. No, we're all right. So now we're going to try. You can use the book you've been workshopping, and I know some folks have already done this, but bear with us. Before you begin, choose what kind of blurb you're going to write. Is it a staff pick for the newsletter? Is it something else? When you're writing, remember to use appeal to describe the book, not just the plot, and make it snappy. We want folks to pick up the book based on your blurb. So we'll give you a couple minutes to do that. And if you want to, you can put your blurb in the chat, which only helps one of us, but I think I can see the chat now, actually. I can see it. I can see the chat. It's a miracle. Oh, Shelley, that's a good one. What happens when you try to assassinate retired assassins?
I like these. These are great. So Jenna starts, a tree blows down in a windstorm, but that's not the end. I think that's a great way to spin after a series of events into a really specific way to discuss the book. Makes me curious about it.
Oh, Kirsten, set in the present day, a millennial who's an underwhelming novelist watches a successful acquaintance die and promptly steals the manuscript of her nearly completed novel. This satire touches on cancel culture, cultural appropriation, and the publishing industry. Is that Yellowface by R.F. Kuang? It sounds like it, and it sounds good. I did guess it. Hooray. That's a great blurb for that book.
These are fantastic. I do hope everybody has a chance to look at the chat when you've finished writing your blurb. I think it's really important that we learn from each other and share these. So if you have a coworker you can kind of buddy up with, or maybe somebody from a library program that you have attended in the past and you want to swap recommendations this way, it's a great way to practice. So I think we should move on.
Should we move on? All right.
Yeah.
Oops.
Keep adding them. This is fantastic. I love reading all of these, and we'll get them all tomorrow too
Yeah.
in the wrap up. So now, if you've written yours down, or if you have it in your head, it's time to revise your work.
Yeah, take a look, see if you can make it even tighter. We gave you that formula, so you might, if you use the formula, you might not have too much to go, but you might find that you have a couple unnecessary words, or you might need to add more words. Is there information you left out? Did you accidentally use a cliche? If so, maybe there's another word or phrase you can use. Maybe you did a great job describing the book, but is it clear who the ideal reader for the book is? So that's the hard part, is sort of stepping back and saying, this is a book for readers who like, you know, suspense. I almost said nail-biting suspense, but that's a cliche, even though I use it all the time. It's like suspense and with cookie recipes. So we're going to do one. We're going to take a second look at a review and turn it into, I'm going to turn this one into a shelf talker that will go on the new bookshelf. So this is a review of Sure, I'll Join Your Cult. And I'm going to share a different screen. It's the audiobook of Sure, I'll Join Your Cult, a memoir of mental illness and the quest to belong anywhere by Maria Bamford, which I'm sure you've all heard about. As she pinballs from one cult to another, these cults ranging from her family of origin to the 12-step programs to her marriage, in her blazingly honest memoir, Bamford brings every ounce of experience as a stand-up comic and prolific voice actor for animation. Her pacing is perfection. Her character voice transitions are seamless. She even throws in a swallowed chuckle or two, as if the line she's reading is a contemporaneous thought. Listeners will marvel at her ability to have them guffawing at the hilarious absurdities of her not at all funny mental illness 1 minute, and in the next, choking back tears at the real impact of tragedy on her life. For the benefit of fans, sound effects cue material she has used before. Other sound effects signal traumatic content and recipes. A supplemental PDF is included, and best of all, Bamford makes frequent reference to it so listeners know how it will enhance their listening. Choose this title for Bamford's frank and humble exposition and sublime example of tragedy plus time equals comedy. Choose it on audio for her uncanny impressions of her family members, her mother in particular, her unflagging energy that urges this to be a one-day listen, and the intimacy of her narration creates while recounting situations that are by turns flat out hilarious, completely bonkers, tear-jerkingly sad, and truly relatable. So this is too long for a shelf talker display, but it does a good job of describing the book, the appeal of the book, and specifically the appeal of the audiobook, so that, you know, if I'm a selector or if I'm a reader's advisor making a book list or something, I get tons of information about the book that I can use to cut down for my purposes, which is what I'm going to do right now. So I'm going to start out with the narrator, with Maria Bamford. So let's say stand-up comic. We want to say who she is, because people might not know who she is. And prolific, now you're gonna see my typing. Voice actor Bamford. There are a few really good phrases that I like in here. I like the perfect pacing. I like voice transitions are seamless. Swallowed chuckle is really nice, but that might not be that might be too much information for this purpose, but I like blazingly honest. So I'm going to say she narrates her blazingly honest memoir with, and then I'm going to look toward the end of the review, because this is where a lot of really great language is, with unflagging energy. Whoops. As she recounts pinballing, another great word, from one cult to another, describing with sound effects, because that's a fun little thing about the book. Situations that are by turns, and then as Heather said, Heather wrote this review. Did I say that? So as Heather says, flat out hilarious, completely, we'll just take it all, completely bonkers, tear-jerkingly sad, and truly relatable. So it's a much shorter version of the review, but it does what it needs to do. So you don't get all the information. You don't get the information about the supplemental PDF. You don't hear what she means by a cult. You don't hear the different kinds of cults she's been in, but you don't need that information on a shelf talker. You just need, who wrote it, what it's about, and then what is the experience of reading the book going to be. So what are the characters like? In this case, you hear Bamford is she's blazingly honest and she has unflagging energy. What is the writing style like? What's the tone of the book like? And you get a sense that this book has a lot of different tones in it. But the overarching tone is something truly relatable. So that's how we do one. So let's go back to our slideshow.
Susan, if you just want to stay here, I think we can jump straight
Okay,
into the next session. So there's a good question in the chat about, is it okay to do this? Is it okay to take somebody else's writing and cut and paste it into your own? And this is coming from Naomi, who is says she's a library student constantly afraid of plagiarism. So huge difference between writing for school, writing to demonstrate your skill, or writing a review that's going to be printed in Booklist, for example, and writing in a way that's going to help your patrons find what they're looking for. It's totally okay. As Booklist writers and Booklist editors, we really hope people use what we're writing to make their job easier. So if taking these longer reviews and pulling out phrases and adjectives that are going to be useful to craft your own writing, that's totally okay. We expect that to happen. We hope that happens. You wouldn't you wouldn't do this and put it in like a book you're publishing about audiobooks, for example. Like Susan's not going to, she's not going to do this and say like, here's my genuine and authentic new review. But absolutely use what's there. Make use of all of the resources that you have. None of us in libraries have all of the time that we want to craft things from whole cloth. So please do use the tools at your disposal. If you find that some author has written a blurb on the back of the book, or a reviewer has perfectly encapsulated that, that phrase just so beautifully, that's like you feel like you can't improve on it, I think it's totally okay to do that.
I think about it as fair use. You're not making money for it. You're just borrowing. And like for Booklist, we would never borrow language from the publisher for our review. Like I in fact don't read the back of the books I'm reviewing because I don't want to be unduly influenced by what the publisher has written. But that's a really different situation from me writing a review. Is a really different situation from me you writing a shelf talker or you writing something for your newsletter. Because absolutely. I make a lot of money writing for Booklist. No. So, all right. Okay. So Heather, do you want to try one?
Yes.
Because we've got one.
So if you can just
scroll us down you can move down, right?
I don't think so.
Can you type?
Okay, we're in the right spot. Okay, so what I'm going to do with this review that Susan wrote for the Phoenix Crown, I'm going to turn it into something that you might include in a newsletter describing this book as a potential, as like the next book club discussion book. So what I'm looking for here are phrases that are going to indicate to the reader of the blurb that there's something to talk about in this book, and that not only are they going to enjoy the book, but they're also going to enjoy the experience of discussing this book with somebody else. So in 1906, opera singer Gemma Garland moves to San Francisco to take her place in the chorus for a performance by the great Caruso, hoping to room with her old friend Nellie Doyle. But when she arrives, Nellie is nowhere to be found, though her housemate, botanist Alice Eastwood, encourages Gemma to stay. Meanwhile, 19-year-old Su Ling Feng dresses as a boy to help deliver her family's laundry, doing brisk business with hand embroidery on the side. She's desperate to escape an arranged marriage. She's also trying to forget her white lover, Reggie, who disappeared without a trace. One of Su Ling's hustles is serving champagne at the parties of industrialist Henry Thornton, who becomes taken with Gemma and offers to become her patron. But it's mere days before the devastating San Francisco earthquake, and it will draw the women together in surprising ways. Quinn and Chang have teamed up to write a powerful and surprising triumph of historical fiction. From the bustling streets of Chinatown to Henry's lavish mansion, the set pieces will transport readers as they are pulled into the women's stories. Lushly detailed, richly imagined, and utterly satisfying, The Phoenix Crown will entrance readers. So I'm seeing in this review a lot of description about setting. We see San Francisco. I'm going to try to highlight as I go. We see San Francisco. We see the time period. We see a lot of reference about, you know, the contrast between a family's laundry and these mansions of an industrialist. I think all of that is really useful for somebody, you know, champagne at parties. All of this is stuff that's going to be, you know, these contrasts are enticing. So I'm going to start with something like days before the great San Francisco earthquake. Whoops. Did it drop down for you?
No.
Okay, great. Days before the great San Francisco earthquake of 1906. And now we're going to get into the characters, because oftentimes character is a great draw for book discussion readers, whether these are fictional characters or it's the players in a nonfiction a tale or a biography. Here, there's lots of characters. I'm not going to describe all of them, because we're going to assume that the people are going to be enticed enough by my blurb that they're going to pick up the novel and meet the characters on their own. But we are going to categorize them as young women. So we're going to say days before the great San Francisco earthquake of 1906, a collection of young women from a wide range, I'm going to say a diverse range of backgrounds, draws together. And this is a really great phrase, in surprising ways. So I'm gonna say that draws together in surprising. And then this right here, this set of 3 descriptions is, I'm going to just lift that because it's so great. I'm
going to scroll down because I don't know. There we go.
And then I'm going to, so lushly detailed, richly imagined, and utterly satisfying. This is a discussable title that will thrill readers looking for an unconventional, let's say an unconventional or an uncommon take on the turn of the 20th century. Okay, so we've narrowed it down to a much shorter description that I still think captures the vibe of the book. I feel like what we're looking for here is to create a sense of urgency, because a lot of things are happening. And we want the reader to understand that it's not a very slow and plotting book, that there's lots of things happening. There's interesting characters. There is a cultural and time period appeal elements that offer lots to discuss. I also want to, at this point out that something Becky said in the last session, which is look to the language of the review. So in the language here, we're trying to evoke the tone of the reading experience. So that's another way to pare down your words, but still indicate tone. Some of the best reviews that I've read are those that don't include a whole bunch of adjectives, but they definitely, in the way they're written, evoke the tone. They sound creepy, they sound cute, they sound very serious and intellectual, and that gives you a lot of information about the book.
Yeah. And Victoria asks if we have any tips or considerations for nonfiction blurbs or similar format. So if you're writing a similar book club blurb but you want them to consider a history book on the 1906 earthquake, is there anything different that we would consider when writing the blurb? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't really think that I would treat it any differently. Because what you're recommending is not a fiction or nonfiction book so much as a reading experience.
Mhm.
And so just honing in on that. I'm assuming that you're not going to be recommending in this format a very academic treatise on the San Francisco earthquake and its repercussions that would be used in an academic setting. We're talking about a book discussion. And maybe if you're doing this for a college library book discussion, you might, or something that specifically focuses on history. But I think that nonfiction books, narrative nonfiction books in particular, have characters, they have plot, there are decisions that the author is making that are very similar to those that a fiction author is making in terms of tone and pacing, and what are they leaving out, what are they including. And I would just continue to think about the appeal words that you would use for that nonfiction book, and then think about the story in that way.
Right. I mean, think about like how Ron Chernow wrote about Hamilton. It was not a dry, boring history book, but it was different than how another author might have treated the subject matter. So what about this specific book makes it special as a reading experience?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Cool. Did you see any other questions that should we go back to our slides?
Let me look. Yeah, I think people are still dropping some of their book descriptions, their blurbs in, which I think is fantastic.
Yes.
And
there's a lot of like, what book is this? Which is really exciting to see. We're all going to have huge TBR piles.
Yeah. Okay. So, how to get, I think we did the remixing your blurb. Oh. So we did that. How to get better at annotations. So all through we keep saying, just do it. What you guys are doing now in the chat is exactly what we hope that you do continue to do. Read reviews in Booklist, read the blurbs that are in the Booklist reader, which are often shortened and different. Read reviews anywhere you can find them. Reading review, just like when authors are asked, how do you get better at being a writer? They say, read more books. How do you get better at being a reviewer or a book blurb writer? Read more book blurbs and read more reviews. Create your own little stash of reviews. It doesn't have to be on a reading social media site. It can just be a Word doc that you keep, that you can then pull from. If you're super organized, set yourself up a database so that you can just like grab those titles when you need to make a book list. Start with things like small desktop displays where you can put a post-it on the cover with 10 words at the most. Just something that is going to be short enough that you're going to feel confident that you're going to get it right, because you don't have to write a whole lot. You're just going to include those very most important things. Let's see, what else? Staff picks, we keep talking about staff picks. And then sharing with your colleagues. Anywhere you can share with your colleagues, it's really useful to do that. Where you have a friendly audience when you're working with your colleagues. You all want to improve together. You all want to give the best service. And so this is a really great thing. I think the other thing to keep in mind is that everyone needs an editor. I am the audiobook section editor, Susan, and it's in a lot of genre fictions, a lot of fiction titles. She edits the reference books. We all have editors. Our editors have editors. Every book list review that you read, it goes through several layers. You have the writer, you have the editor, then you have a copy editor, and then you have a proofreader. So please use those resources, whether it's just you setting it aside and coming back to it later, or you and a friend swapping things around. Yeah, I think that there's no shame. We really, really do hope you continue to use all the resources at your disposal.
Yeah. Oh, every time I go to switch, it doesn't want to switch. So if you're having trouble getting started, you can always borrow from us. I wrote steal, but I meant borrow. So here's an example from the Booklist Reader Essentials list called the Top 21st Century First Novels So Far. This one's about The Kite Runner by Khaled Hosseini. Use this as a jumping off point for your own annotation. And it's important to practice writing your own because we're not always going to have the annotation for the exact book you want for the exact purpose you want it, but please use resources that are available to you, and Booklist and Booklist Reader are two of them. And that's us. So feel free to get in touch, and you'll have these slides with our contact information on. We'd love to hear from you, hear how your writing is going. And then a couple resources we used. Booklistonline.com is great. And then Booklist Reader, tons of resources for annotations and reviews. We mentioned Becky's RA for All blog, which is a great, great resource, not just for book blurbing, but for all kinds of stuff on Reader's Advisory. And then the gold standard, Joyce Saric's Reader's Advisory Service in the Public Library. If you're getting started on your Reader's Advisory journey, you can't go wrong with this book. It's a couple years old, but it's still as relevant as it has ever been.
And it includes lots of adjectives for those appeal elements.
And that's all for us. So thank you all so much for joining. And we appreciate your time, and we hope that these workshops were helpful for you and your staff. As a reminder, all 3 sessions in today's workshop were recorded, and every recording will be sent out to registrants tomorrow. So if you missed any session or would like to revisit one, you will be able to do so. And that's a wrap. We'd like to thank our wonderful panelists again for their time and expertise, especially me and Heather. No, just kidding. All of you guys were amazing. We couldn't have done it without them. And to our sponsors, Penguin Random House Library Marketing and Source Books for their generous support. Happy Readers Advising, everyone.